The station, called Eternal Accord, was the largest thing ever built by any species in the known galaxy. It floated in neutral space between 4 star systems, spinning slowly, its rings lit up with the glow of 1,000 windows. Ships from 212 civilizations were docked along its outer arms. Their flags and signal lights blinked in the dark. Inside, the Grand Conclave was in session. The main hall of the conclave could hold 40,000 beings at once. Today it was full. Every seat taken, every screen live, every translator unit humming with quiet readiness. The atmosphere was thick and heavy, the way air feels before a storm breaks. Representatives from species that had been spacefaring for 1,000,000 years sat beside species that had only recently found their way to the stars. They all had one thing in common today. They had all come to watch the humans. Ambassador Yara Ose sat alone at the defendant's table. She was a tall woman with deep brown skin, short silver hair, and the kind of posture that came not from pride but from total calm. She wore a simple dark blue coat. No medals, no decorations. Just the small silver pin of the Earth Diplomatic Corps on her lapel. She had a glass of water in front of her, and she was drinking it slowly, looking around the hall the way a person might look around a park on a quiet afternoon. The Secretary General of the Interstellar Union, a tall gray creature called Overseer Veth of the Aethon Dominion, stood at the central podium. His 4 eyes moved slowly across the chamber as he spoke. His voice, translated into every known language simultaneously, was deep and formal and carried the weight of someone who believed completely in what he was saying. The case before the Grand Conclave today, Veth said, is not a small matter. It is not a trade dispute. It is not a border disagreement. It is the question of whether a species that has shown repeated, willful disregard for the laws and traditions of this union has any right to remain a member of it. There was a low sound across the chamber. Agreement, mostly. Some quiet murmuring. A few species who sat near the back shifted in their seats. The charges were read aloud. They took a long time. Humanity had, over the course of their 240 years as Union members, committed what the Conclave formally described as 417 separate violations of interstellar law. Most of them were things that humans considered common sense. They had shared food with species under trade embargo. They had offered medical help to wounded soldiers on both sides of wars they were not part of. They had refused 3 separate orders to dismantle their orbital defense platforms. They had, on one famous occasion, simply ignored a Union-wide communication blackout and broadcast an open signal to 12 uncontacted species, 2 of which had responded and were now thriving members of the galactic community. The most recent violation was the worst in the Union's eyes. Humanity had quietly terraformed 3 rocky worlds in the outer belt of the Kareth system. They had planted forests, built small outposts, started moving climate equipment into orbit. The problem was that the Vreth Collective, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the Union, considered those worlds sacred. They were barren. They had always been barren. They were supposed to stay barren, because that was what the Vreth ancestors had decreed 40,000 years ago, and the Union had agreed to honor that decree for as long as the collective remained a member. Humanity's official response to this had been a document 2 pages long that said, in polite but plain language, that 3 barren rocks circling a dying star should not stay barren if people needed somewhere to live. The document had caused more outrage in the conclave than the actual terraforming. Overseer Veth let the list of violations finish. Then, he folded his long hands together on the podium and looked directly at Ambassador Ose. Ambassador, he said, the Union has shown patience with your species for 240 years. We have issued warnings. We have levied fines. We have suspended privileges. None of it has changed your behavior. The Conclave has therefore decided that the time for patience is finished. Today we will vote on a permanent measure. Yara Ose set her water glass down. She looked at him. She did not speak. The motion before us, Veth continued, is this: that the species known as humanity, and the planet known as Earth, and all territories under human administration, be permanently expelled from the Interstellar Union. That all trade routes between Union members and human space be formally closed. That all Union personnel be withdrawn from human territories within 90 days. That no Union member species be permitted to trade with, communicate with, or travel to human space without the express authorization of the full conclave. This exile shall have no expiration. It shall not be reviewed. It is permanent. The hall was very quiet. Yara Osei picked up her water glass again and finished it. Ambassador Osei, Veth said, under Union law you are permitted to address the conclave before the vote. You have 15 minutes. She stood up. She walked to the podium. She was not in a hurry. She adjusted the small microphone. She looked out at 40,000 beings watching her from their seats, and at the millions more watching on screens across the galaxy, and she took a slow breath. She said nothing for a moment. Then she began. I want to start by saying that I understand why we are here, she said. Her voice was clear and unhurried. I understand that from where you sit, humanity looks like a problem. We do not follow the rules you made. We do not ask permission before we help someone who needs help. We do not accept that a piece of rock should stay dead because someone old decided it should stay dead. We do not stop talking to a species just because a committee told us they were too dangerous to speak to. We are, by every measure this body uses, the most difficult members you have ever had. She paused. I also want to say that in 240 years, we have fed more people, healed more sick, and made more friends across this galaxy than any other single member of this union. Not because we are special, but because when we see something that needs doing, we do it. That is all we have ever done, and I know that is exactly what frightens you. The hall was completely silent. Even species that had never liked humanity were listening now. I am not going to argue against this vote, Yara said. I am not going to beg. I am not going to list our contributions and ask you to weigh them against our sins. You have already decided. I can see it. The question before you is not really whether to exile us. The question is whether you believe that exile will accomplish what you hope it will. She looked at Overseer Veth directly. It will not, she said simply. But I think you should find that out for yourselves. She stepped back from the podium. She picked up her coat from the back of her chair. She nodded once at the hall. The way someone nods at an old acquaintance, they do not particularly like, but bear no real anger toward. Then she walked toward the exit door at the back of the room. Overseer Veth called after her. The vote has not yet been conducted, Ambassador. Protocol requires that you remain present. She stopped at the door. She turned back just enough to be heard. Conduct it, she said. The vote was 211 in favor of permanent exile. One species voted against. It was a small, quiet civilization called the Thal Mori, a reptilian people from the far edge of the Union's eastern territories. Almost nobody remembered they were members. They had been friends with humanity for 80 years, and they were the only ones who voted to keep them. The result was announced. Screens across the galaxy lit up with the news. Earth was out. Permanently. Done. In the corridor outside the main hall, Yara Osei was already walking toward the docking bay where the human shuttle was waiting. A junior aide from her team was keeping pace with her, tablet in hand, face tight with barely controlled anxiety. Ambassador, the aide said. They voted. It's official. We're exiled. Permanently. What do we do? Yara Osei did not slow down. She had her coat on now, one hand in her pocket. There was a small smile on her face that the aide had never seen before. It was not a sad smile. It was not an angry smile. It was the smile of someone who has just been told exactly the news they were hoping for. We go home, she said. And then? She pushed open the docking bay door. Stars were visible through the far viewport. Her ship was right there. Engines warm. Crew ready. And then, she said quietly, almost to herself, we get to work. She stepped aboard. The door closed behind her. The shuttle detached from the Eternal Accord with a soft mechanical click that nobody in the main hall heard, because they were all still celebrating. Out in the dark between the stars, The small human ship turned its nose toward the distant yellow dot of the sun and began the long flight home. 5 years passed. They passed the way years do when nothing seems to be happening slowly, and then all at once. In the Grand Conclave, the mood in the first weeks after the exile had been one of quiet satisfaction. Overseer Veth had given a short speech about the importance of law and order. The Vreth Collective had sent a formal message of gratitude to the Conclave's senior council. Several species had thrown small celebrations. The dominant feeling, if you had walked the halls of the Eternal Accord in those early days, was relief. The difficult ones were gone. The galaxy could breathe again. Nobody expected the silence. It started almost immediately. The human diplomatic channels went dark first. Not gradually all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. The emergency frequency that Earth had always kept open for interspecies communication simply stopped transmitting. The Union's border monitoring stations near the Sol system picked up no distress signals. No trade requests. No appeals for reconsideration. No black market courier ships trying to slip through the blockade with contraband or messages. Nothing. Just the soft hiss of background radiation and the distant light of a yellow star. The Conclave's Intelligence Division, a cautious body that specialized in tracking exactly this kind of thing, filed its first report 4 months after the exile. The report was short. It said, in the dry language of official documents, that human space had gone quiet in a way that was difficult to classify. It was not the quiet of collapse. The energy readings from the Sol system were actually increasing, not decreasing. But there were no outgoing communications, no distress calls, no smugglers, no attempts to re-establish contact through back channels the way every other expelled or sanctioned species had done within the first 6 months. The report suggested this was probably a political strategy. Humans were proud. They were making a show of not asking for help. It would last another year at most, the report concluded, before economic pressure forced them to seek readmission. The report was filed. No one acted on it. By the second year, something else had begun to happen. 3 species near the edge of Union space had quietly withdrawn their ambassadors from the Conclave. Not officially. Not loudly. Their seats were simply empty one day, and when Union officials tried to make contact, the replies were polite, but vague. The Thalmori, the one species that had voted against the exile, had recalled their entire diplomatic corps within 8 months. The Dorvai Wanderers, a nomadic trading people who had crossed human space for decades and formed deep commercial and personal ties with human crews, stopped appearing at their usual Union trading posts. The Kessin remnants, a refugee species that Earth had sheltered for 30 years after the destruction of their home system, sent a single formal message to the Conclave that thanked the Union for its past assistance and wished everyone well. That was the last message the Kessin remnants ever sent to the Conclave. By the 3rd year, Union intelligence had upgraded its reports from routine to priority. The energy signatures coming from the Sol system were now 4 times what they had been at the time of the exile. New construction patterns were visible from long-range sensors. Not the small, careful construction of a species trying to hold itself together. Something bigger. Something that was being built in a hurry, but not in panic. The signatures were too ordered, too deliberate. Whatever was going up out there was planned. An intelligence analyst named Resh, a young member of the Pale Chorus assigned to monitor the Sol system border, filed her own private report at the end of the 3rd year. She sent it to her supervisor, who sent it up the chain, where it eventually reached the desk of Overseer Veth's senior aide, who read the first paragraph and set it aside. Resh's report said this: the construction signatures near Earth were consistent with shipyard expansion on a scale she had not seen anywhere in Union space in the last century. The power output of the Sol system had increased by a factor that suggested not just new buildings, but new energy production infrastructure. And there was something else. 3 times in the past 6 months, her sensors had picked up what she could only describe as a drive signature from within the Sol system that did not match any known propulsion technology. It was fast. Faster than anything in the Union's current fleet. Each time it appeared, it was gone in seconds. as if whatever was making the signature was testing something and then immediately powering it down. She had flagged these readings 3 times. Nobody had responded to any of her flags. In the 4th year, a small automated beacon appeared at the edge of human space. It was placed right at the boundary line the Union had established when the Exile decree was issued. It broadcast on a rotating frequency that hit every known communication band, and it did this continuously, 24 hours a day. The message was in all 212 Union languages, translated with the kind of precision that only came from people who had spent years studying the cultural nuances of each species they were addressing. The message said, "We are not waiting to come back. We are building somewhere better. You are welcome to watch." When this was reported to the conclave, the reaction was mostly laughter. Overseer Veth described it in a public session as exactly the kind of theatrical gesture one expects from a species that never understood the difference between confidence and arrogance. The Vreth Collective called it sad. Several other senior members agreed that it was the behavior of a civilization that had not yet accepted its situation. Only Resh, sitting alone in her monitoring station with her ignored reports stacked in an ignored folder, did not laugh. She listened to the beacon message one more time. Then she pulled up her sensor logs and looked at the drive signatures again. She had a feeling she could not quite name. It was not fear exactly. It was closer to the feeling you get when you realize, too late, that the quiet person in the room has been listening to everything and understanding all of it. In the 5th year, something happened that the conclave could not ignore. A Union trade convoy, 30 ships carrying goods between the Vreth Collective's core systems and 3 outer colonies, was passing through a standard corridor near the border of what had been human space. It was a route they had used for 50 years. Routine. Safe. The convoy's lead navigator noted in her log that the journey was expected to take 11 standard days. On the 4th day, one of the convoy's outer escort ships picked up an object on long-range sensors. The object was traveling at a speed that made the navigator's instruments give a reading she assumed was a malfunction. She recalibrated. The instruments gave the same reading. She called her captain. The object was a ship. It was large, larger than any single vessel in the convoy. It was moving at a speed roughly 7 times faster than the convoy's maximum capability, and it was not accelerating. It was already at that speed, and appeared to be cruising casually, the way a person walks when they have nowhere urgent to be. As it passed the convoy, it dropped to sublight for approximately 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, it broadcast a short signal on the convoy's open frequency. The signal was a simple text message. It said, "Nice day. Safe travels." Then it went back up to speed and vanished from sensors in under 4 seconds. The convoy navigator filed a full report. The report went up to Conclave Intelligence. This time, it did not get set aside. It landed on Resh's desk with a priority tag that had not been used in her department for 11 years. She read it once. Then she went back to her own old reports, the ones nobody had responded to, and laid them out in order. The construction signatures. The energy increases. The unknown drive readings. The beacon. And now this. She sat for a long time in her quiet monitoring station, with the soft hiss of background radiation in her earpiece and the yellow dot of Earth's sun on her long-range screen. Then she wrote a new report. It was longer than her others. At the top, she marked it urgent. She sent it not just to her supervisor, but directly to the offices of 6 senior conclave members. The report began, "I believe we have made a significant error in our assessment of what exile would mean for humanity. I further believe that we are running out of time in which that error can be cheaply corrected. What follows is my evidence." 3 of the 6 senior members read it that same day. 2 of them dismissed it as alarmist. One of them, a quiet, old diplomat from a species called the Athean, who had been in the Union for 900 years and had seen more than most, read it twice, slowly. Then she forwarded it with a short note of her own attached. Her note said only, "We should have listened to the quiet ones sooner. We may still have time. I am not certain." Outside the station, the galaxy turned. The stars did not care about exile decrees. The humans were out there somewhere in their quiet system, building something in the dark, and the beacon at the border kept broadcasting its patient, cheerful message to anyone who passed. "You are welcome to watch." The first thing Savek noticed when he arrived on the human station was the noise. He had expected quiet. He had grown up in the Union. Union stations were calm, orderly places where everyone moved with purpose and spoke at reasonable volumes and followed the directional signs painted on the floors. They were efficient. They were polite. They were, if he was being honest with himself, a little bit boring. The Solarian Compact's primary station, humans called it Cornerstone, was not boring. It was loud in the way that a living thing is loud. People were talking over each other in corridors. Someone was laughing very hard somewhere to his left. A group of humans and Thalmori engineers were having what appeared to be a heated argument near a large wall schematic, pointing at different parts of a ship diagram, and then at each other, and then back at the diagram. Two small human children were running past him at full speed, chasing something that turned out to be a small wheeled robot that appeared to be running away on purpose. The smells were extraordinary. Food from a dozen worlds cooking somewhere nearby. Metal and oil from the shipyard bays. Something floral he could not identify. Savek stood in the middle of it all with his travel bag over his shoulder and his assignment papers in his hand, and he felt, for the first time since leaving his home world, genuinely interested in where he was. He had been sent by the Thalmori Engineering Council to work with the Compact's ship design division. It was a new partnership the Thalmori had voted against the Exile and quietly aligned themselves with humanity in the months that followed. At home, some of his people were nervous about the choice. Out here in the Compact, the nervousness seemed to have been replaced entirely by something else. By activity, by movement, by a general feeling that things were being built, and that building them mattered. His supervisor found him within 10 minutes. Her name was Danny Reyes, and she was a short, human woman with dark hair pulled back and permanent ink stains on her right hand. From whatever it was, she was always writing. She shook his hand the human way, firm, direct, brief, and immediately started walking, talking over her shoulder, as she expected him to keep up. "Good timing," she said. "We're in the middle of the third test phase on the new drive, and we need a fresh eye on the cooling calculations. Thalmori thermal engineering is the best in this part of the galaxy, so you're going to be busy." "The drive," Savek said carefully, following her through a busy corridor. "Is that the drive I read about in your invitation documents? The one that the Union said was theoretically impossible?" "Yeah." She grinned without turning around. "We hear that a lot." The drive was called the Alcubierre-Ose drive, named after two people. One, a human scientist from centuries past who had first described the mathematics of the thing, and one, a current human engineer named Rael Ose, who was the nephew of Ambassador Yara Ose, and who had, according to everyone Savek spoke to, barely slept in 4 years. The drive worked by doing something to space itself, rather than to the ship moving through it. It did not break the rules of physics. It worked around them, the way a clever person does not break a locked door, but finds the window. Savek spent his first 3 days reading the design documents. On the 4th day, he found 17 small errors in the cooling system, calculations that would have caused the drive to overheat during sustained use. He brought them to Danny. She looked at them for about 30 seconds, and then called Rael Ose, who appeared via screen, looking exactly as tired as everyone had described, listened to Savek explain the errors, and said simply, "Fix it, and you can have whatever resources you need." Savek fixed it. The 4th test of the drive was successful. The ship crossed a distance that should have taken 3 days in 11 hours. After the test, everyone celebrated. Humans celebrated loudly. They made a lot of noise and ate a great deal and kept clapping each other on the back and shoulders. The Thalmori members of the team celebrated more quietly, but they celebrated. Savek found himself in the middle of it all again, holding a cup of something warm and sweet that a human had pressed into his hand, and realizing that he was smiling. He began writing letters home that week. He wrote them to his younger sister, who was studying engineering back on their home world, and who had asked him to tell her everything. He wrote, The humans are not what I expected. I had read the Union's descriptions of them: chaotic, unpredictable, dangerous, unable to follow rules. Some of this is true. They do not follow rules they think are bad rules. They are very loud. They move fast and they change direction fast, and sometimes they will start doing something a completely different way, in the middle of doing it the first way, because someone had a better idea. This is frightening at first. Then you realize that the better idea is usually actually better, and you start to understand the logic of it. He wrote, "They work very hard. Not because they are forced to, because they want to. The ones here came here because they wanted to build the drive. Nobody made them. The whole compact is like this: people doing things because they decided those things needed doing. It is a strange way to run a civilization. It seems like it should not work. It works very well." While Savek was writing his letters, things were happening across the rest of the compact that he only heard about secondhand, in pieces. The way you hear about a large storm from people who were in different parts of it. 3 new worlds were being colonized. Not the chaotic, desperate colonization of a species fleeing a dying home: careful, planned colonization, with ecological systems designed to support life rather than just survive it. The humans used methods that the Union's own terraforming guilds had classified as experimental and unproven. Out here, without anyone to tell them the methods were unproven, they simply proved them. 2 of the 3 worlds were already showing stable atmospheric readings within 4 years. The third was harder, a cold, dry world with difficult geology, and the humans working on it were having the kind of detailed, heated arguments Savek had seen on his first day at Cornerstone, pointing at things and disagreeing at high volume, which meant they were close to a solution. The Compact's charter, the document that governed the new union between humanity, the Thalmori, the Dorvai Wanderers, and the Kessin remnants, was unlike anything Savek had read from the Union's long history of treaties. It was short. It was written in plain language that any adult of any of the 4 species could read and understand. It said that all member species had equal vote weight, regardless of size or age. It said that decisions that affected all members required agreement from all members. It said that no member could be punished for disagreeing. It said that help, when needed, would be given without debt attached to it. Union legal scholars who somehow obtained a copy through channels that were technically illegal under the Exiled decree spent weeks looking for the hidden complications. There were none. The document meant exactly what it said. This, the legal scholars agreed privately, was either incredibly naive or incredibly sophisticated. They could not decide which. 6 months after the drive test, the Compact made contact with a species called the Greth. The Greth were large, territorial, and had a reputation in the Union as one of the most dangerous, uncontacted species in the Eastern Quadrant. The Union had placed them under a strict quarantine 30 years earlier, after an early contact mission went badly. Under Union law, no member species was permitted to attempt contact again without a conclave vote, and the conclave had not voted on it because the Vreth Collective always blocked the motion. The Compact was not a Union member. They sent a small ship with 3 people on board, a human linguist, a Dorvai cultural specialist, and a Kessin diplomat who had experience with species recovering from trauma. The Greth fired on them twice. The small ship did not fire back. It moved, avoided the shots, and then sat still again, and kept broadcasting a greeting signal. On the 4th day, the Greth stopped firing and started listening. By the end of the month, they had agreed to a friendship meeting. By the end of the year, they had signed a basic cooperation agreement with the Compact. The Greth were not ready for full partnership. They needed time and trust, and the Compact gave them both without demanding anything in return. Savek heard about the Greth contact while eating dinner with Danny in the station's main food hall. He put down his fork and sat quietly for a moment, thinking about the Union's 30-year quarantine and the 3-person team who had just done in a month what the entire weight of the Union's diplomatic machinery had failed to do in 3 decades. "How?" he asked Danny. She shrugged. "We didn't try to control the outcome. We just showed up and kept showing up until they believed we weren't a threat. The Union's first contact team showed up too. Yeah, she said. But they showed up with a list of what the Greth had to agree to before the Union would consider being friendly. We just showed up. She picked up her food again. Turns out that matters. Savek thought about that for the rest of the evening. That night he wrote to his sister again. He wrote about the Greth. He wrote about the Charter. He wrote about the drive test and the colonized worlds, and the constant noise of Cornerstone Station, and the human children chasing the robot on his first day. At the end of the letter he wrote, "They are not reckless. They simply have a different relationship with fear. When they look at something impossible, they feel something I do not have a word for in our language." Our closest translation is, "Excited. I think I am beginning to understand it." 12 years after the Exile, the Interstellar Union held its annual Trade and Freight Review, which was normally one of the most boring sessions in the Conclave's calendar. It was the kind of session where junior diplomats were sent in place of senior ones, and everyone assumed the numbers would be roughly the same as last year, with small variations. This year the numbers were not roughly the same as last year. The Morith Corridor, a major shipping route that ran through the central territories of the Union and connected 14 separate trading systems, had experienced a 43% drop in freight volume over the previous 2 years. The committee presenting the data had 3 theories about why. None of the 3 theories mentioned humans directly, because mentioning humans at a formal conclave session was increasingly uncomfortable. But everyone in the room understood what had happened. The Morith Corridor had run efficiently for a century because human cargo ships had quietly operated as the corridor's backbone. Human crews were fast, reliable, and willing to take routes that other species found too long or too complicated. When the Exile removed them from Union space, nobody had immediately moved in to fill the gap, because everyone assumed someone else would. Nobody had. This was the first crack. It was not dramatic. It showed up as a number in a report in a session that most senior members had skipped. But it was real. And it was not the only one. The pharmaceutical distribution network that served the Union's outer territories had also developed gaps. The human medical freighters that had serviced dozens of small colony worlds on the outer edge were gone, and the replacement system that the Union had commissioned 3 years after the Exile was still not fully operational. 3 colony worlds had filed formal complaints about medicine shortages. 2 more had simply stopped filing complaints, which the Union's Welfare Monitoring Office noted with the careful, worried language of bureaucrats who knew something was wrong but had no good solution to offer. The calls to reconsider the Exile had been quiet at first. A single petition, filed 8 years after the vote, by a block of 7 smaller species who had felt the economic impact early. The petition was rejected by the Senior Council on the grounds that the Exile decree was permanent and not subject to review. A second petition, 2 years later, from 17 species, was rejected on the same grounds. A third petition, filed in the 11th year, had been signed by 31 species. It was also rejected. But this time, all 31 species formally abstained from the next 6 months of conclave votes in protest. This was the largest organized abstention in the Union's history, and it had locked up 3 infrastructure bills that the Senior Council badly needed to pass. The Vreth Collective and the Aethon Dominion, the 2 most powerful members of the Senior Council, and the 2 species most responsible for driving the Exile, responded the way powerful species usually respond when they feel their authority being tested. They issued a direct embargo against the Solarian Compact. All Union member ships were formally prohibited from entering compact space. All compact ships were prohibited from approaching within 100 light-years of Union territory. A naval patrol was organized along the border to enforce it. The patrol lasted 11 days before the compact made it clear that the border was not something they were particularly concerned about. The first incident was almost gentle. A Union patrol vessel, one of the Aethon Dominion's mid-size warships, picked up an unidentified contact on its long-range sensors, approaching at high speed from compact space. The crew went to alert status. The contact was enormous, bigger than anything in the patrol fleet. It came in at a speed that should have been physically impossible, and then simply stopped, relative to the patrol ship, about 2 kilometers off the bow. It stopped so cleanly, so precisely, that the patrol captain later told his superiors he had initially thought his sensors had malfunctioned, because nothing that large moving that fast should have been able to stop that perfectly. The ship sat there for about 30 seconds. It was not aggressive. It did not power its weapons. The patrol's instruments would have detected that. It was just there, enormous, and calm, and completely unbothered. Then it broadcast a short message on the patrol's frequency. The message said, "Hello, we are passing through. You are welcome to follow, but you will have difficulty keeping up. Have a safe patrol." Then it moved again, at the same speed as before, and it was gone from sensors in under 5 seconds. The patrol captain wrote in his report that he had never in his career felt so certain that someone was not threatening him, and also so certain that they absolutely could if they chose to. The feeling, he wrote, was very unsettling. The compact did not challenge the embargo with force. They did not need to. Their ships simply went where they wanted, and the Union's patrol fleet could not get close enough to stop them. The embargo was, in practical terms, a piece of paper. Everyone in the conclave knew it. Nobody wanted to say it out loud. It was in this atmosphere, embarrassed, fractured, increasingly anxious, that Director Huang Wei arrived. He was an old man, 73 years old, with white hair and a patient face, and the manner of someone who had spent his whole life in rooms full of people who were talking past each other and had long since stopped being frustrated by it. He had been a diplomat for 40 years, first for Earth, and then for the Compact. He was, by almost any measure, the best negotiator in human space. He was also, Yara Osei had told him before he left, the person she trusted most to walk into the lion's den and come back with the lion's contact information. He arrived at the Eternal Accord station in a compact shuttle that parked itself inside the station's most secure docking bay without triggering a single alarm. The station's security chief later spent 3 days trying to figure out how this was possible. He never did. Huang Wei walked through the station alone, carrying a small bag and a sealed container that turned out to contain a tea set. He was escorted after much confused communication between station security and senior council offices to a meeting room near the top of the station, where Overseer Veth's senior aide waited for him, with the rigid posture of someone who had been told to be firm, but was already slightly rattled by the circumstances of the man's arrival. "Director Huang," the aide said, "you understand that this meeting has no official standing. The Exiled decree." "Of course," Huang Wei said pleasantly. He set the tea set on the table and began preparing 2 cups with the calm efficiency of long practice. "This is not an official meeting. I am simply an old man who wanted a conversation. I brought tea." The aide stared at him. Then, after a pause, he sat down. Overseer Veth himself arrived 20 minutes later. He had not planned to come. He had sent the aide specifically so he would not have to come. But something about the report he received that the human director was sitting in the room calmly making tea and appeared to be in no hurry whatsoever had compelled him. He was not sure why. Perhaps it was simply that everyone he had dealt with in politics for the past 40 years was always in a hurry, and someone who was not made him curious. Huang Wei poured tea for both of them. He did not speak first. He let Veth speak first. Veth said what he was supposed to say. That the exile was permanent. That the compact had no standing to negotiate with the Union. That this meeting itself was a breach of protocol, and that Huang Wei should understand he was here only because the Union was willing to extend a temporary courtesy. Huang Wei listened to all of this without interrupting. Then he reached into his bag and placed a document on the table between them. It was printed on physical paper, which was unusual enough that Veth looked at it for a moment before he looked at Huang Wei. "This is a trade offer," Huang Wei said. "Read it when you like. There is no deadline. We are patient people." He picked up his tea. "The offer includes full access to our drive technology, our ecological and terraforming systems, our medical distribution network and pharmaceutical stockpiles, our communications infrastructure. Everything that your outer colonies have been missing, and a few things you did not know you were missing. Veth stared at him. And what do you want in return? A formal apology. Not from you personally, from the Conclave, as a body. And a restructuring of the Union's voting system to give all member species equal weight, regardless of size or history. Huang Wei set his cup down. You exiled us. We built a better home. We are not here to punish you for that. Some of your people are suffering right now from problems we can solve, and we have never been good at walking past someone who needs help. That is all this is. He stood, collected his tea set, and put it back in his bag. He left the document on the table. There is no expiration on the offer, he said at the door. We have time. We always have more time than people expect. He paused. The tea was from Earth, a region called Darjeeling. I thought you might like it. Then he left. The shuttle detached from the secure docking bay, with the same baffling invisibility with which it had arrived. Veth sat alone in the meeting room for a long time after he left. The document was on the table. The second cup of tea was still warm. Outside the viewport, stars turned slowly in the dark, and somewhere out there beyond the border, a species that the Union had dismissed, exiled, and tried to embargo, was apparently doing just fine, and had come back not with weapons or ultimatums, but with tea, and a piece of paper, and a very annoying amount of calm. Veth read the document. Then he read it again. Then he sat back and pressed his long fingers together, and thought about how, in 40 years of politics, he had never once felt quite so thoroughly outmaneuvered by an act of pure generosity. On the morning of the 15th anniversary of the exile, the Grand Conclave opened its regular session in the main hall of the Eternal Accord station. It was supposed to be a routine day. The session agenda included 3 trade amendments, a border dispute between 2 minor species, and a procedural vote on committee appointments. Nothing unusual, nothing historic. Overseer Veth had reviewed the agenda the night before and gone to sleep at his normal hour. He woke up to 17 urgent messages and a junior aide who had been knocking on his door for 8 minutes. By the time he reached the main hall, every screen in the building had already switched over. The change had not been authorized by any station administrator or conclave official. It had happened the way the compact shuttle had parked in the secure bay smoothly, cleanly, without triggering a single alarm. One moment the screens were showing the session agenda. The next moment they were showing something else. They were showing the compact. The feed was live and it was beautiful. The main image was of a world that had not existed 15 years ago. One of the terraformed planets, now fully alive, its oceans, a deep blue-green, its continents dotted with city lights visible even from orbit. Fireworks were going off above the atmosphere, huge blooms of colored light that faded slowly in the dark. Ships were moving in formation above the planet, dozens of them. The big compact vessels that moved at impossible speeds, now flying slowly and deliberately in a pattern that, if you watched long enough, you realized was forming a shape. A rough, simple shape. The shape of an open hand. There was music. A choir, performing live from the planet's surface. Half the voices were human. Half were Thalmori, their harmonics layered in the way that Thalmori music had been layered for 10,000 years, but woven now with the human voices in a way that sounded like something neither species had ever made alone. Savek, watching from Cornerstone Station, stood very still when he heard it and felt something happen in his chest that he did not have a good word for in either of the languages he spoke. On 10 different colonies across the compact, flags were being raised simultaneously. Earth's flag, the Thalmori banner, the Dorvai symbol, the Kesson crest, and 6 others new flags for the 6 species who had joined the compact in the years since the exile. 12 flags going up at the same moment on 12 different worlds. In the conclave's main hall, nobody was speaking. The 40,000 beings who had packed in for a routine session were watching screens that covered every wall. And the screens were showing a civilization that had been expelled from the room 15 years ago, and had apparently, in that time, built something extraordinary. Then the main feed shifted. The music became quieter, Still there, still playing, but softer. And on the largest screen at the front of the hall, a face appeared. Yara Ose was older now. Her silver hair was longer, swept back. The lines around her eyes were deeper. She stood on what was clearly the outer hull observation deck of a large vessel behind her, stars, and the curve of the terraformed world below. She wore a dark coat, and on her lapel was still the small silver pin of the Earth diplomatic corps, worn now with the kind of ease that comes from wearing something for so long it has become part of you. She looked into the camera for a moment without speaking. The hall was completely silent. 15 years ago, she said, you told us we were too much, too loud, too difficult, too human. You voted to remove us from the room and close the door, and that would be, you believed, the end of us as a problem. Her voice was calm. It was not angry. It was the same voice she had used when she walked out of the exile vote, unhurried, precise, carrying the tone of someone who has thought carefully about every word before saying it. You were correct that we are very human. You were not correct about what that means. She let that sit for a moment. We did not come back to prove you wrong. That was never the point. We came back because some of your members asked us to help them build something better, and because there are people in your outer colonies who are sick and hungry and have been waiting too long for a freight ship that does not come. We came back because we have medicine and food and technology that can help them, and because humans cannot look at someone who needs help and walk the other way. We have tried. We are not built for it. She looked directly into the camera. In the hall, not a single being moved. The offer Director Huang Wei placed on that table is still open. It has no expiration. We are patient. We are also, if you need a reminder, very good at building things and very hard to stop when we have decided something needs doing. We would prefer to do the next part together, but we will do it either way. She paused. And then, for just a moment, the formal composure slipped not into anger, not into bitterness, but into something much simpler. She smiled. It was the same smile she had worn 15 years ago, walking out of the exile vote, the patient one, the one that the junior aide had not understood then, and that the galaxy was only now beginning to understand. You told us to leave, she said. We did. We grinned. We worked. And now we are back. The feed held on her face for one more second. Then it returned to the full view: the planet, the ships, the fireworks, the flags on 12 worlds. The silence in the hall broke all at once. Not into order. Into noise. Into argument. Into shouting. Into the particular chaos that erupts when a large number of people who disagree very strongly are all in the same room and all suddenly have something urgent to say. The Vreth Collective's senior ambassador stood immediately and demanded the feed be cut. Nobody cut it. A block of species from the outer territories stood simultaneously and moved for an emergency session to review the exile decree. Overseer Veth called for order 3 times. The third time, his microphone was simply overridden politely, cleanly, without malice by whatever system the compact had used to take over the screens. And the music from the choir on the terraformed planet played instead for about 15 seconds before someone in the station's technical room managed to restore the official audio. The formal vote to review the exile decree was called within the hour. 79 species voted to begin the review process. 41 species voted against. The Vreth Collective stood and announced that if the exile was reversed, they would withdraw from the Union entirely. There was a long pause. Then 41 of the species who had abstained from the vote stood one by one and said, in the careful, formal language of Union proceedings, that they called the Vreth Collective's bluff. The collective did not withdraw. They sat back down. They did not speak again for the rest of the session. The exile decree was not reversed that day. These things take time in large bodies with complex rules. There were committees to form, and procedures to follow, and documents to review. But the direction had changed. Everyone in the hall felt it shift the way you feel, a change in the wind, not seeing it, not quite hearing it, just knowing. On Cornerstone Station, Savek watched the vote results arrive on a screen in the food hall. He was sitting with Danny Reyes, who was eating something and reading a technical document at the same time, the way she almost always was. Around them, the station's usual noise continued, people talking, something clanging in the shipyard bays, the smell of food from a dozen worlds. When the vote numbers came in, Savek read them twice. 79 to 41. Not a full reversal, but a beginning. He looked at Danny. "Did you know it would go this way?" he asked. She looked up from her document. She thought about it for a moment. A real moment, not a quick dismissal. Then, she put her stylus down. "No," she said. "Not exactly. You never know exactly. You just know what you're going to do regardless." "And what were you going to do regardless?" "Keep building," she said simply. "Keep showing up. Keep helping whoever needed help." She picked up her stylus again. "The vote is good. If the vote had gone the other way, we would have just kept going. Eventually, they would have had to deal with us either way, because we were not going to stop." Savek thought about that. He looked around the food hall at the humans and Thalmori and Dorvai and Kessin, and 3 other species he had come to know over 12 years on this station, all eating together in the comfortable noise of a place that felt, improbably, like home. "Danny," he said. "Yeah? I think I understand now. What humans feel when they look at something impossible." She glanced up at him. There was a question in her expression. "Excited," he said. She grinned. It was the same grin, he realized, that Yara Osei had worn 15 years ago, walking out of a room that had just closed its door on humanity. The patient one. The one that knew something the room did not know yet. "Yeah," Danny said. "That's the one." Outside the station, the Alcubierre Osei drive ships moved between the stars at speeds the Union had called impossible. On 12 worlds, flags rose in the morning light of 12 different suns. On a terraformed ocean world that had not existed a decade and a half ago, a choir of 2 species whose voices had never been meant to harmonize kept singing anyway, and the sound of it traveled out into the dark. And it was not a war cry or a victory shout. It was just music. It was just people doing what people do when they are free and together and pointed towards something worth building. It was more than enough.